The stars seemed different that morning when Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the observation deck of Earth Defense Station Alpha. She had been watching space for 20 years, but something felt wrong today. The sensors had picked up strange readings at the edge of the solar system 3 hours ago, and now her best scientists were running around like scared children. Dr. Amy Chen burst through the doors with a tablet in her hands and fear in her eyes. She was the smartest person Kate knew, and seeing her this worried made Kate's stomach drop. Amy ran straight to the main display screen and connected her tablet. What appeared on the screen made Kate's blood run cold. 500 massive ships hung in space just past Pluto. They were bigger than anything humans had ever built, and they looked like they were made for war. Sharp edges and dark metal covered every surface. Weapons that could destroy entire cities pointed in all directions. These were not friendly visitors. Captain Lisa Hayes was in her ship, the UES Guardian, when the alert came through. She had been running training exercises with her crew when every screen on her bridge lit up red. The communication officer turned to her with wide eyes and said the words that would change everything. The aliens were calling themselves Draconians, and they had sent a message to Earth. Their leader was someone called Commander Zarathex, and she did not sound friendly. The message was simple and terrifying. Earth had 72 hours to surrender completely, or every human would die. Kate Morrison called an emergency meeting of the United Defense Council. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered in the war room deep under Geneva. The room, that had once been used to plan responses to natural disasters, now buzzed with talk of alien invasion. General Patricia Wright from the American forces slammed her hand on the table. She wanted to fight immediately. President Chen from the Pacific Alliance shook his head and said they needed to try talking first. Ambassador Sarah Kim from the European Federation looked at the numbers and said fighting was suicide. The truth was simple and horrible. Earth had 50 ships that could fight in space. The aliens had 10 times that number, and their technology was clearly better. Human weapons might not even scratch their hulls. But Kate Morrison had not become an admiral by giving up when things looked bad. Lisa Hayes volunteered to lead a reconnaissance mission. She would take the Guardian and 4 other ships to get closer looks at the alien fleet. Maybe they could find something that would help. Maybe they could discover a weakness. It was dangerous, but doing nothing was worse. Far away on a world that humans did not know existed, other eyes watched the same stars. Princess Lyrelei Starweaver stood in the crystal chamber where her people observed the galaxy. She had been watching Earth for decades and had grown fond of the strange creatures that lived there. The elves of Ethermoor had technology that mixed magic and science in ways that other races could not understand. They could hide entire worlds from detection and travel between stars without ships, but they had a strict rule about not interfering with younger races. Archmagus Sylviana Moonwhisper was the oldest and wisest of the Elven Council. She had seen empires rise and fall across the galaxy for over 1,000 years. When Lyrelei came, to her with plans to help the humans, Sylviana's ancient eyes showed both understanding and worry. The Draconians were known to the elves. They had been conquering worlds for centuries, turning free peoples into slaves or simply killing them all. Their technology was stolen from dozens of different races they had destroyed. They were like a disease that spread from star to star. But the elven laws were clear. They did not reveal themselves to younger races. They did not interfere in galactic politics. They stayed hidden and safe while others fought and died. It had kept them alive for millennia, but Lyrelei wondered if it was right. Back in space, the Draconian fleet waited like a storm cloud ready to break. Commander Zarathex sat on her command throne aboard the flagship Deathbringer. She was 7 feet tall with scales that gleamed like black metal and eyes that burned red with ancient hatred. Zarathex had conquered 43 worlds in her lifetime. She had seen entire civilizations beg for mercy before she gave the order to destroy them. Humans would be no different. They were weak and divided, fighting among themselves even as death approached their world. But Admiral Vexara, who served as Zarathex's second-in-command, was not so sure. She had been studying the human transmissions, and something about these creatures was different. They did not seem to understand that they were beaten. They kept planning and scheming as if they actually had a chance. Vexara had served with Zarathex for decades and had always respected her commander's judgment. But lately, something had changed. Zarathex had become more violent and unpredictable. She wore an ancient artifact around her neck that she claimed gave her strength, but Vexara wondered if it was doing something else. On Earth, the countdown continued. 60 hours remained until the deadline. Lisa Hayes and her small fleet were preparing to launch their dangerous mission. Amy Chen was working with teams of scientists to find any possible advantage. Kate Morrison was coordinating with every military force on the planet. Nobody knew that high above them, in hidden dimensions, elven observers debated whether to break thousands of years of tradition. Nobody knew that within the Draconian fleet, cracks were beginning to show. The next few days would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the future of the entire galaxy. The war for Earth was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same. Captain Lisa Hayes pushed her ship harder than she had ever pushed it before. The Guardian and her escort ships raced toward the outer edge of the solar system, where the Draconian fleet waited. Her mission was simple in theory, but deadly in practice. Get close enough to scan the alien ships and find any weakness that might help Earth survive. Lieutenant Maria Santos sat at the communication station monitoring every frequency for Draconian transmissions. She was the best code breaker in the human fleet, and if anyone could crack alien communications, it would be her. What she found in the background chatter made her heart race. The Draconians were not as united as they appeared. Maria picked up fragments of arguments between different ship commanders. Some voices questioned their leaders' orders. Others complained about unnecessary destruction of previous worlds. There were cracks in their perfect military machine. Back on Earth, Dr. Amy Chen worked day and night in her laboratory. She had been analyzing the energy signatures from the Draconian ships and found something interesting. Their computer systems used neural networks similar to biological brains. Human quantum computers that everyone thought were primitive might actually be able to disrupt alien systems because they worked in chaotic ways. Admiral Kate Morrison barely slept as reports came in from around the world. Every nation was preparing for war, but their weapons seemed like toys compared to Draconian technology. She needed a miracle, and she needed it fast. 48 hours remained until the deadline. Meanwhile, Captain Hayes was pushing deeper into space when something impossible happened. Her navigation systems went crazy as reality seemed to bend around her ship. Space twisted, and the Guardian was pulled through what looked like a hole in the universe itself. Lisa found herself in orbit around a world that should not exist. It was hidden in some kind of dimensional pocket that her instruments could barely detect. The planet below was covered in crystal cities and floating gardens that glowed with soft light. Before she could react, her ship was caught in an energy beam and pulled down toward the surface. The Guardian crashed in a forest of silver trees under a sky filled with 2 moons. Lisa and her crew stumbled out of their damaged ship to find themselves surrounded by beings that looked like humans, but were clearly something else. They were tall and graceful with pointed ears and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Ranger Captain Arya Dawnblade led the elven patrol that captured the humans. She had never seen creatures like them before, but her orders were clear. All intruders were to be brought before the High Council immediately. The humans offered no resistance as they were clearly outmatched and in no position to fight. Princess Lyrelai was in the council chambers when the humans were brought before the elven leaders. She had been arguing with the other council members about helping Earth when the very people she wanted to save literally fell from the sky into their world. Lisa Hayes stood before the elven council with dirt on her uniform and determination in her eyes. She explained how her world was about to be destroyed and begged for help. The elves listened in silence as she described human courage in the face of impossible odds. Archmagus. Sylviana questioned Lisa about human tactics and technology. She was amazed when the human captain solved a strategic puzzle that had stumped elven military minds for centuries. Lisa used unconventional thinking and creative solutions that the elves had never considered. While Lisa was learning about elven society, her communications officer, Maria Santos, was discovering something troubling back in the Draconian fleet. Admiral Vexara had begun her own investigation into Commander Zarathex's recent behavior, and what she found disturbed her greatly. Zarathex wore an ancient artifact called the War Spirit that was supposed to grant strength and courage in battle. But Vexara had access to historical records that most Draconians had forgotten. The War Spirit was not just a source of power, it was a parasitic entity that fed on conflict and violence. The artifact had been locked away for good reason thousands of years ago. It drove its wearers to seek ever greater levels of destruction and conquest. Vexara realized that Zarathex was no longer fully in control of her own actions. The War Spirit was pushing her toward unnecessary violence. On the hidden elven world, Princess Lyrelei began secretly sharing knowledge with Captain Hayes. She showed Lisa how elven technology combined magic and science in ways that seemed impossible. Weapons that could phase through solid matter, shields that bent space itself, ships that could travel instantly between stars. Lisa demonstrated human problem-solving by helping the elves optimize their defensive systems. She suggested using unpredictable patterns that would confuse attackers. Her ideas were simple but effective, and the elves had never thought of them because they always sought elegant solutions. The bond between the human captain and elven princess grew stronger. As they worked together, both were warriors who cared deeply about protecting innocent people. Both were willing to take risks to do what was right. They found that their different perspectives made them stronger when they worked as a team. Dr. Amy Chen made another breakthrough in her Earth laboratory. She discovered that human quantum computers could actually crash Draconian neural networks because they produced truly random outputs. The aliens were used to fighting logical enemies with predictable responses. Human chaos was something they had never encountered. 36 hours remained until the Draconian deadline when Princess Lyrelei made a decision that would change everything. She convinced Captain Hayes to attempt something that had never been tried before. They would combine human unpredictability with elven portal technology to strike at the heart of the enemy fleet. But first, they needed to test their theories. Lyrelei and Arya volunteered for a dangerous mission to plant one of Amy Chen's chaos devices on a Draconian supply ship. If the device worked, it would prove that the alliance between humans and elves could actually work. Admiral Vexara continued, monitoring her commander's increasingly erratic behavior. Zarathex was ordering unnecessary attacks on empty space and ranting about enemies that existed only in her mind. The War Spirit was consuming her sanity along with her soul. Vexara faced an impossible choice. She could remain loyal to her commander and watch the Draconian fleet destroy itself along with Earth. Or she could take action to stop the madness before it went too far. Either path led to consequences that would echo across the galaxy. On the hidden world of Ethermore, two species that had never met before began planning the impossible. Humans who had barely learned to travel between planets would team up with elves who could bend reality itself. Together they would challenge an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. The alliance that would save Earth was being born in secret while the countdown to destruction continued. But first, they would have to prove that their wild theories could actually work in the deadly reality of space combat. The first joint mission between humans and elves began in the crystal workshops of Ethermore, where Princess Lyrelei and Captain Lisa Hayes worked side by side. They were building something that had never existed before, a device that combined human quantum chaos with elven portal magic to create weapons that could strike anywhere instantly. Dr. Amy Chen had transmitted the plans for her chaos engines through the hidden communication link that Lisa had established with Earth. The device looked simple, but Amy insisted it would scramble Draconian computer systems by feeding them truly random data that their neural networks could not process. Ranger Captain Arya Dawnblade studied the tactical information that Lisa provided about human military doctrine. She was amazed by how humans used unpredictable strategies and creative thinking to overcome superior enemies. Elven warfare had always been elegant and precise, but humans fought like they had nothing to lose. The test mission would target a Draconian supply depot on the edge of their fleet formation. It was heavily defended, but not impossible to reach if they used elven portal technology to appear inside the defensive perimeter. The plan was risky, but if it worked, they would prove that their alliance could actually threaten the mighty Draconian Empire. Lieutenant Maria Santos had continued monitoring Draconian communications from her position on the Guardian. She discovered that Admiral Vexara was conducting secret investigations into her own commander's behavior. Maria realized that the Draconians might have internal problems that could be exploited. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Kate Morrison was preparing humanity's last desperate defense. Every ship that could fly was being armed with Amy Chen's quantum disruption devices. If the Alliance mission failed, then Earth would fight alone with whatever weapons they could build in the few hours that remained. 24 hours before the Draconian deadline, the Joint Strike Team prepared for their mission. Lyrelay and Aria would lead a small group of Elven Rangers, while Lisa and Maria represented humanity. They would use an experimental portal to appear directly inside the Draconian supply ship. The portal technology required perfect harmony between the human pilots and Elven magic users. Lisa had to learn to think in patterns that matched Elven meditation techniques, while Lyrelay learned to embrace the controlled chaos of human tactical thinking. It should have been impossible, but somehow it worked. Admiral Vexara was in her private chambers studying ancient Draconian texts when she made a terrible discovery. The war spirit artifact that Commander Zarathek's wore was not just influencing her judgment. It was completely taking over her mind and body. Soon, there would be nothing left of the warrior that Vexara had once respected. The text described how the war spirit had driven previous hosts to commit atrocities that made even hardened Draconian warriors sick. It fed on violence and destruction, growing stronger with every life it claimed. If it was not stopped, it would push Zarathek to destroy not just Earth, but every world in the galaxy. The strike team materialized inside the Draconian supply depot without triggering any alarms. The portal technology had worked perfectly, placing them in a maintenance corridor where no guards were stationed. Maria immediately began searching for computer terminals while Aria and her rangers secured the area. Lisa was amazed by how efficiently the Elven warriors moved. They flowed through the ship's corridors like water, avoiding detection through a combination of magic and skill that was beautiful to watch. She tried to match their grace while staying ready for combat at any moment. They found the main computer, core guarded by 2 Draconian sentries who were focused on external threats and never expected enemies to appear behind them. Aria's team subdued the guards silently while Maria connected Amy's chaos device to the central network. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every screen in the supply depot began showing random patterns as the quantum device fed impossible data into the Draconian neural networks. Automated systems shut down or began operating in reverse. The ship's artificial intelligence started speaking in languages that did not exist, but the chaos also triggered emergency alarms throughout the depot. The strike team had minutes before reinforcements would arrive in overwhelming numbers. They needed to gather intelligence and escape before the entire Draconian fleet discovered their presence. Maria downloaded everything she could access from the confused computer systems. Ship positions, fleet communications, even personal logs from Draconian officers. The information would be invaluable for planning future operations if they survived long enough to use it. In the detention sections of the supply depot, they made an unexpected discovery. The Draconians were holding prisoners from dozens of different alien species, beings who had been enslaved when their worlds were conquered and were now forced to work in support roles for the fleet. One of the prisoners was a being made of living crystal who communicated through patterns of light. She called herself Resonance and explained that her people had technology for enhancing portal systems. If they could be freed, they might be able to help the Alliance transport entire fleets instantly across space. Aria made a command decision to free as many prisoners as possible during their escape. It was not part of the original mission, but she could not leave innocent beings to suffer when rescue was possible. Lisa agreed immediately, recognizing the tactical value of gaining new allies. The prisoner rescue complicated their escape as dozens of alien beings had to be transported through the portal system, but Resonance proved immediately useful by enhancing the portal's capacity with her crystal technology. What should have required multiple trips was accomplished in a single massive evacuation. They emerged back on Ethermore with their mission accomplished and valuable new allies in tow. The Chaos device had worked beyond expectations, proving that human-elven cooperation could threaten Draconian superiority. But more importantly, They now had allies from across the galaxy who had their own reasons to fight. Admiral Vexara received reports of the supply depot attack with growing alarm. The damage patterns made no sense according to Draconian tactical doctrine. Someone was using technology that their sensors could not properly detect and strategies that their computers could not predict. She realized that Zarathex's obsession with the primitive humans had blinded her to other threats. There were clearly other powers involved in this conflict, and the Draconian fleet was not prepared for enemies they did not understand. Vexara made her own command decision. She began secretly contacting Admiral Kate Morrison through coded transmissions hidden in routine fleet communications. If the war spirit was going to destroy everything anyway, she might as well try to save what could be saved. On Earth, the final preparations for humanity's last stand continued as the deadline approached. But now there was new hope. The alliance with the elves was real, and it was working. Even more importantly, they had learned that the Draconians were not invincible. Princess Lirelai stood with Captain Hayes on the observation deck of the Elven capital watching the stars. Tomorrow they would launch the largest portal operation in Elven history, bringing the fight directly to the heart of the Draconian fleet. Both knew that failure would mean the destruction of everything they cared about. But they also knew that they were no longer alone. Humans and elves fighting together had accomplished something that neither could have managed separately. With their new alien allies and the growing rebellion within the Draconian fleet itself, the impossible was becoming possible. The hidden war had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The alliance grew stronger as more species joined the fight against the Draconian Empire. Engineer specialist Rachel Kim worked with the rescued crystalline beings to enhance the elven portal systems beyond anything previously imagined. The crystals could amplify and focus magical energy in ways that turned simple portals into weapons of war. Resonance and her people had suffered under Draconian rule for decades before their rescue. They brought knowledge of how the Empire operated and where its weaknesses lay hidden. More importantly, they brought a burning desire for revenge that matched human determination perfectly. Pilot Commander Nicole Brooks found herself leading squadrons that mixed human fighters with elven crystal ships and alien vessels of designs she had never seen before. The combination should have been chaos, but somehow it worked. Each species brought different strengths that covered the weaknesses of the others. Admiral Vexara's secret communications with Earth had revealed the truth about the War Spirit artifact and its influence over Commander Zarathex. But it had also revealed something even more terrifying. Zarathex was preparing to activate an ancient Draconian doomsday weapon that could crack planets apart from the inside. The weapon was called the Core Shatter, and it had been used only once before in Draconian history. An entire star system had been destroyed when the device turned a gas giant into a supernova that consumed everything within 10 light years. If Zarathex activated it near Earth, the entire solar system would die. Princess Lirelai and Captain Hayes planned Operation Starfall with the desperate urgency of people who knew they had only one chance to save everything. They would use the enhanced portal network to position alliance fleets throughout the Draconian formation simultaneously. It was the largest military operation in galactic history. Dr. Amy Chen and Archmagus Sylviana worked together to create an improved version of the Chaos engines that could target the Core Shatter weapon specifically. The device needed perfect neural network synchronization to function, and even small amounts of quantum chaos might be enough to stop it. But they were running out of time. The Draconian deadline had passed, and Zarathex had begun the activation sequence for the Core Shatter. The weapon would need 12 hours to reach full power, and then Earth would have minutes to live. Operation Starfall had to succeed in the next few hours, or nothing else would matter. Admiral Kate Morrison stood in the command center of Earth, Defense Station Alpha, watching tactical displays that showed the impossible becoming real. Portal storms were opening throughout space as the Alliance fleet prepared to attack from every direction at once. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. The first phase of the operation began when Nicole Brooks led her mixed squadrons through portals that opened directly behind Draconian picket ships. The enemy's sensors had been tracking empty space one moment, and then suddenly found themselves surrounded by hostile forces that should not have been able to get there. Chaos engines activated throughout the Draconian fleet as Alliance boarding parties materialized on ship after ship. The quantum devices fed impossible data into alien computers that had never been designed to handle truly random input. Ship after ship fell silent as their neural networks crashed under the assault. But Zarathex had anticipated betrayal from within her own fleet. The core shatter weapon was isolated on her flagship with its own independent power systems and computer networks. Even as her fleet crumbled around her, the Doomsday device continued its relentless countdown to planetary destruction. Admiral Vexara led the Draconian ships that had chosen to rebel against their possessed commander. She knew the layout of the flagship better than anyone and guided Alliance forces through the massive vessel's defenses. But the war spirit was fighting back with everything it had. Ancient Draconian war machines that had been dormant for centuries suddenly activated. Throughout the flagship, mechanical warriors with weapons designed to kill gods began hunting the Alliance boarding parties through corridors that twisted and changed like living things. The war spirit was reshaping reality itself to protect its host. Lisa Hayes and Lyrelay led the primary assault team toward the core shatter chamber, while Arya and Maria secured their escape route. The flagship was larger than most cities and filled with traps that defied understanding. They had to fight their way through puzzles that required both human creativity and elven wisdom to solve. Resonance and her crystal people had remained on Ethermoor to maintain the portal network, but their abilities reached across space to help the boarding teams. Crystal resonance allowed them to detect weak points in the ship's structure and guide the Alliance forces along the safest routes. Rachel Kim worked frantically to modify the Chaos engines for the final assault on the core shatter weapon. The device was protected by neural networks more complex than anything they had faced before. She needed to create a quantum cascade that would propagate through the entire system simultaneously. The war spirit sensed the approaching threat and began possessing Draconian crew members throughout the flagship. Ordinary soldiers became superhuman, warriors driven by ancient hunger for destruction. They fought with no regard for their own safety and had to be stopped by overwhelming force. Amy Chen made a breakthrough in understanding how the core shatter weapon actually worked. It did not just crack planets apart. It fed the destruction back into itself to become stronger with every world it destroyed. The war spirit had been planning to use Earth as the first step in destroying the entire galaxy. Vexara fought her way to the weapon chamber alongside the Alliance teams, but found herself facing Zarathex for the final time. Her former commander was no longer recognizable as the warrior she had once served. The war spirit had consumed everything that made her Draconian and replaced it with pure destructive hunger. The battle for the core shatter chamber was unlike anything in recorded history. Ancient magic clashed with advanced technology while quantum chaos fought against neural precision. Reality itself seemed to bend and break under the strain of forces that should never have met in combat. Lisa and Lyrelay reached the weapon core just as its countdown entered the final phase. They had minutes to stop a device that could destroy star systems. Amy's modified Chaos engine was their only hope, but it had never been tested against something this powerful. The war spirit made one final desperate attempt to complete its plan by trying to possess Lisa herself. But human consciousness was too chaotic and unpredictable for the ancient entity to control. The spirit found itself trapped in a mind that refused to follow any logical pattern. Lyrelay used that moment of confusion to activate the Chaos engine directly against the core shatter weapon. Quantum randomness flooded into neural networks that had been designed for perfect precision. The weapon began to tear itself apart from the inside as its own power turned against it. But the explosion threatened to destroy the flagship and everyone on it. The Alliance teams had seconds to escape through the portal network before the ship became a miniature supernova. They raced through corridors that were collapsing into themselves as reality returned to normal. The war spirit died with its host as the flagship exploded in a burst of light that could be seen from Earth. The ancient evil that had driven the Draconian Empire to commit genocide across the galaxy was finally destroyed. But the war was not over yet. Thousands of Draconian ships remained throughout the solar system, and many of their crews still believed in the cause of galactic conquest. The Alliance had won a great victory, but the final battle was still to come. The death of Commander Zarathex and the destruction of the core shatter weapon sent shockwaves through the remaining Draconian fleet. Admiral Vexara broadcast the truth about the war spirit to every ship in the Armada. Many commanders had suspected that something was wrong with their leader, but none had dared to speak against her. Captain Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the Guardian, watching Draconian ships throughout the solar system as their crews struggled to understand what had happened. Some ships immediately powered down their weapons and requested permission to withdraw. Others seemed determined to continue the fight even without their flagship. Princess Lyrelai worked with the Elven Portal Network to coordinate alliance forces across the battlefield. They had achieved victory against the primary threat, but hundreds of enemy ships remained, and some of their commanders were just as dangerous as Zarathex had been without the War Spirit's influence. Dr. Amy Chen and Archmagus Sylviana monitored the quantum signatures from the destroyed flagship to make sure that the War Spirit had been completely eliminated. Ancient evils like that sometimes found ways to survive even total destruction, but their instruments showed nothing except normal space where the doomsday weapon had been. Admiral Kate Morrison opened communication channels to address the Draconian fleet directly. She offered terms that most human commanders would have called too generous. Any ship that surrendered immediately would be allowed to leave the solar system peacefully. Those who chose to fight would face the full power of the Alliance. The response surprised everyone. Nearly half the Draconian fleet accepted the surrender terms immediately. These were professional soldiers who had grown tired of endless conquest and destruction. Without the war spirit driving them to violence, they wanted nothing more than to return home to rebuild their civilization. But a significant number of ships chose to continue fighting. Their commanders had built their entire identity around Draconian superiority and could not accept defeat by inferior species. These hardliners gathered together under the leadership of Admiral Korath, Zarathex's most fanatical supporter. The final battle began when Korath's forces launched a desperate attack on Earth itself. They ignored the Alliance fleet and drove straight toward the planet, hoping to accomplish their original mission even if it meant their own destruction. It was a suicide run motivated by pride and hatred. Nicole Brooks led every fighter squadron. The Alliance could muster in a desperate interception mission. Human pilots flew alongside elven crystal ships and alien vessels of a dozen different designs. They had to stop the Draconian attack before it reached Earth's orbital defenses. The space battle was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Energy weapons painted rainbow patterns across the darkness, while portal storms allowed ships to appear and disappear like ghosts. The Alliance forces used every trick they had learned about combining different technologies and fighting styles. Resonance and her crystal people provided crucial support by creating communication networks that allowed perfect coordination between species that had never fought together before. They turned the chaotic mix of Alliance forces into a single unified weapon that could respond to threats faster than any traditional fleet. Lieutenant Maria Santos coordinated the electronic warfare aspects of the battle from her position on the Guardian. The Chaos engines had evolved beyond simple disruption devices into sophisticated weapons that could target specific systems on enemy ships. She could disable weapons without destroying life support or crash navigation while leaving communications intact. The Draconian hardliners fought with the desperation of fanatics who knew they were doomed but refused to surrender. Their ships pushed beyond safe operating limits, and their crews accepted casualties that would have broken lesser forces. But they could not overcome the tactical advantages of the Alliance. Admiral Vexara found herself in the strange position of fighting against her own people to protect the species they had come to conquer. She led the Draconian ships that had chosen peace against those that still wanted war. It was a civil war that would determine the future of the entire empire. One by one, the hardliner ships were disabled or destroyed. Some crews chose to activate self-destruct systems rather than accept defeat. Others fought until their vessels were nothing but drifting hulks. A few finally surrendered when they realized that continued resistance was pointless. Admiral Korath made a final desperate attempt to ram his flagship into Earth's moon. The impact would not destroy the planet, but it would cause catastrophic damage to the surface and kill millions of people. His ship was heavily damaged, but still moving when the Alliance forces caught up with it. Lisa Hayes made the decision to board Korath's flagship personally. The Draconian admiral was too dangerous to leave alive and too proud to surrender. She led a strike team through the dying ship's corridors while its hull burned around them from accumulated battle damage. The final confrontation took place on the flagship's bridge, where Korath waited with the last of his loyal followers. Unlike Zarathex, he was not possessed by any ancient evil. He was simply a warrior who could not accept that his way of life was ending. The fight was brief, but vicious. When it was over, the Draconian threat to Earth had ended completely. The surviving ships of their fleet were scattered across the solar system with their weapons powered down and their crews requesting permission to leave. The mighty armada that had threatened to destroy humanity was no more. In the days that followed, representatives from dozens of species gathered on Earth to establish what would become known as the Galactic Cooperation Council. The alliance that had saved Earth grew into something larger as former enemies and new friends worked together to prevent future wars. Princess Lirelai became the first elven ambassador to Earth and established the Terra Ethermore Embassy in Geneva. Captain Hayes was promoted to admiral and given command of the first integrated fleet that included ships and crews from multiple species working together as equals. Dr. Amy Chen and Archmagus Sylviana founded the Academy of Integrated Sciences, where the best minds from across the galaxy could work together to solve problems that no single species could handle alone. Their first project was developing technology to heal worlds that had been damaged by Draconian conquest. Admiral Vexara led the effort to rebuild Draconian civilization according to principles of cooperation rather than conquest. It would take generations to overcome centuries of militaristic culture, but she was determined that her people would find a better way to live. Many Draconian ships had simply vanished during the final battle, using secret jump drives to disappear into the depths of space. Some sought remote worlds where they could start over away from their shameful past. Others joined the scattered resistance movements that still opposed galactic cooperation, but the majority of the former empire chose to embrace the new order. Draconian engineering skills were badly needed to repair the damage that centuries of war had caused across the galaxy. Former conquerors became builders working to heal the wounds they had created. The war that had threatened to destroy Earth ended with the birth of a new kind of galactic civilization. Instead of one species dominating all others, the future would be built on cooperation between equals. Human creativity combined with elven wisdom and alien knowledge to create possibilities that none had imagined alone. Years later, children on 100 worlds would learn about the day when the galaxy changed forever. They would hear stories of brave warriors from different species who chose to work together instead of fighting each other. And they would grow up in a universe where cooperation was stronger than conquest and diversity was valued more than uniformity. The Draconian fleet that had come to destroy Earth was gone, but the galaxy was better for its passing. From the ashes of an empire built on fear, a new community had risen that was built on hope.